Hey everyone, this is Jens Anso from my knife making shop here in Denmark. Today's episode will be a Q&A.
All right, Jens, I've prepared a few questions for you. How did you get your start in professional knife making?
I've been making knives basically my full adult life plus a few. I would consider that I got my start in professional knife making in 1997, 98, which were the time period where I was in college as an architect and industrial designer. I had made knives for 8 years at this point, and I started taking this serious as a business. And I formed my first company called Anso Knives. At this point, I had a strong desire to start selling knives to an American market. So at this point, it was the very early days of the internet and very early days of discussion forums about knives on the internet. So what I did was I wrote an article or a blog post, if you will, about myself and my knives and my desire to get some customers in the US. The specific reason for me to look for customers in the US was that I have always seen inspiration from the American knife makers, and this is how I taught myself how to build knives. This was my first knife making book, Step-by-Step Knife Making by David Boy. This book was written in the early 70s, if I'm not mistaken. This is how I took my very early steps into knife making. I actually realized looking through my library that one of my very first knife making books grew legs and walked out of my shop. I probably borrowed it to some aspiring knife maker at some point. I've always been told that you have such an American feel to the style of knives that you build. And I felt that my knives would do well in the American market. So I wrote a forum post and offered people a discount percentage if they were willing to write a review about the knife that they received. I was very open about the type of review that I was after. I wanted feedback. The review could be negative or good. The most important factor for me was actually to get my knives into the hands of users. That post led to something like 10 orders. As I finished these orders, I started getting response back from these customers. And that response helped me tremendously in developing a level of craftsmanship. I understood what was important and what was less important, and that helped me develop a sense of quality level. One of these 10 clients or customers happened to be a writer for a magazine called Tactical Knives. The result of the dealings with this gentleman was a 4 or 5 page article in this magazine. That article came out while I was doing my final exams at the School of Architecture and led directly to me receiving 100 orders for custom fixed blades. It put me in a very special situation where I actually had to figure out what to do with this. At this point, I had absolutely no desire or need or want to become self-employed. I definitely could see a potential in being a knife maker as a supportive income for my yet to come design job. But I had no desire to actually become a full-time knife maker at this point. But what I did was I took the order book to the bank and told them, well, I need to buy a house. I was living in a dormitory at that time and had a tiny workshop where it allowed me to do some work, but it was very limited on space. I had something like 7 to 9 square feet worth of workshop, but I crammed both a belt grinder, a bandsaw, and a bunch of other tools in there. Definitely not a solution for future shop. And with me graduating college, I had to move out anyway. So I went to the bank, borrowed some money, bought the house that this shop is in now, and the rest is history.
I've known you for a few months now, maybe half a year, and I've seen you design custom knives.
Yeah.
But you also do designs for factories. What does that even entail?
So just a brief explanation to the whole custom scene and the factory scene. So as you know by now, I make my custom-made folders. At some point, I started making designs available for factories. And at this point, I have designed knives for Boker in Germany, Fox and Viber in Italy, MKM in Italy, Spyderco in the US, Kershaw and Zero Tolerance in the US. It all started right after, I actually believe this was my first blade show, so I would say 2005. I had brought a very special design for me. I called it the Rock Lobster. This is Spyderco's version of the Rock Lobster. Right after the show, I got an email from the president of Spyderco, Sal Glesser. I had for a year or so, maybe a little longer, made knives with the approval from Spyderco to use their trademark round hole. This round hole in the design here shown in my Zero design, the design aesthetics just lend itself really well to what I was going for. So right after the show, I get an email from Sal Glesser asking if he could buy a Rock Lobster. And from that experience and sending him a knife, we developed the Spyderco Rock Lobster. And since then, I started making more projects with Spyderco, for instance, this Zulu. I started working with Boker. And fast forward to a few years ago, I designed the 0220 for Zero Tolerance in Oregon. I took an education in industrial design. To me, this is just a normal step to actually design for factories. That's what I was trained to do. So being able to do exactly that as part of my knife making career, that is just such a great opportunity for me. And later on, I also established, together with my two partners, Jim and Jesper, I established the company called Giant Mouse, where we design and have produced knives. It all goes hand in hand with the custom side of business, but the factory side is something that is super important to me and something that gives me a great joy.
I'm kind of proud of myself for these questions because I feel like almost like a professional. Why folders in the first place?
Back when I was in college, I started looking at folders. At this point in time, I had only made fixed blades. I have made a lot of fixed blades. What I wanted to do was challenge myself to the next level in knife making, and I saw folders as being exactly that. So I had my first try in making a folder back in that tiny workshop. In order for me to even just know anything about the modern folder, I bought some factory knives, took them apart, and then I ordered some titanium and G10 and some screws and etc. from a supplier called Halpern Titanium. I believe I was their first international customer. With that box of materials was a photocopy of an article from one of the knife magazine. This is how you build a liner lock folder, and that is how I started looking into making a folder with less than adequate tools. I finished that first folder, and that's actually one of the advice that I give aspiring knife makers is when you start a project, see if you can follow it through. Even though you don't feel adequate at it, follow it through. And I did that with that first folder, and it turned out to be okay, but I could also see from my skill level that I was not anywhere near where I felt I should be in order to undertake the daring quest of making a folder. Fast forward a couple of years, I tried it again. This was after a couple of years of being self-employed as a knife maker. Still not quite there yet. I needed some more skills, especially in working with titanium. This is a daring material when you're new at it. This was before YouTube and the vast amount of information on the subject. So there were a few books on folder making, but mainly on traditional folder making slip joints the old time way, like they did dating back to grandpa's folding knife. This helped a lot, but it didn't show how to build the modern day liner lock. So I seeked out some of the knife makers I knew were building the style of knives that I wanted to make, and I wrote letters. This was not pre-email, but before you were even sure that these makers would have a computer or email. One of the makers who wrote me back was Bob Tosola, who has later written this beautiful book, and I'm very happy to be able to call Bob a friend now. Bob was so kind to actually answer me back with some of my questions. What I would do was I would limit my letters to 1 or 2 questions for each maker that I would write, so I wouldn't be a burden on them. But Bob wrote me back telling me you should do this and that, and also look for the upcoming book. I can't express the gratitude I have towards Bob and him taking the time to write this book. This is how I got into professional folder making, for sure.
Enough about the knives, Jens.
Enough about the knives?
I've also prepared a few rapid fire questions. Coffee from the shelf in the supermarket or artisanal coffee?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as to call it artisanal coffee, but I do like my Italian espressos, and I do like a good quality coffee. So filter coffee, no thank you. Espresso, yes, thank you.
If you only had one watch you could wear for the rest of your life, which one would you wear?
So I would say it would have to be somewhat durable. It would have to have some features that I would not feel scared about ruining on a normal day. I don't wear a watch in the shop, but other than that. So it would have sapphire crystal, a automatic movement. Right now my choice would go to a Omega Railmaster, which incidentally I have, which is a beautiful watch. It's a timeless classic. It's a beautiful watch, and I think that would be my choice.
If you could only have one car, what car would that be? Which car would that be?
For 10 years, I would drive a Land Rover Defender. I thought that would be the car to end all cars. But if you've ever driven a Land Rover Defender on the highway, you will understand this is not the last car you will own. I actually like to say I would go with a Porsche 911 from 1973, a vintage one, and obviously that would have to come with a mechanic like store that could actually keep it in running condition. I'm not a huge car guy. I love the car that I drive currently, which is a Volkswagen Amarok pickup truck. Do I have any sentimental feelings about it? None whatsoever. I drove the Land Rover for 10 years and I loved that car. Every time I got in behind the wheel, just pure joy. I sold my last Land Rover a couple of years ago, and it's not the end of Land Rovers for me. I will definitely get a Defender again at some point, but it won't be my main vehicle, that's for sure.
Do you prefer tools off the rack or handmade tools?
Well, I'm surprised you even asked that.
Stupid question.
I don't mind tools off the rack. Most often I will modify them just a little bit to make them my own. Every now and again it just needs a little tweak, but custom made tools it's just the best. To know that somewhere somebody put blood, sweat and tears into building this tool, it gives you some kind of connection to the tool. For instance, I talked about this hammer a few times before. This is made by a craftsman, an artist called Seth Gould, and this is just a beautiful bench hammer. Will it perform better than a DSI, Danish Steel Industry hammer? Probably won't. Do I get more joy out of using this? Certainly do. This happened to be a vintage hammer that I restored and rebuilt the handle on. So this actually has a little more sentimental value for me, and I really enjoy using this as well. I have more hammers than anybody need.
All right, Jens, that concludes my questions for this round of a Q&A. We should do this another time.
We should definitely do this another time. If you enjoyed these questions and answers, feel free to write me some questions, and we'll gather them together and then do another episode in, who knows, a couple of weeks, couple of months. Anyways, write me an email, put a comment below here, and we'll answer some more questions. And until then, remember to subscribe, hit like, and until next time, take it easy.